Well, man, these are exciting times, huh, Code?
In what way?
We're about to launch the Patreon and put our new shit out there into the open for the first time.
All right, yeah. Definitely exciting. I feel like we've been working on it I've been working on it before you moved back here in, what month was that?
That was in May.
Back in May. So I'd been working on it for at least 2 months before that, as far as the Patreon video goes, filming that, doing interviews, gathering content from contributors, whether that's video or photos.
I wouldn't use the words we're behind schedule, but I know that we thought we were going to launch all this somewhat in the beginning of the summer, and I think we quickly realized it was going to take a little bit more time.
It's been a learning process, so whether it's how much better these podcasts sound than the ones that we did with the USB mic, and then realizing that we wanted to sound as professional as possible.
When me and Cody decided that we wanted to really kind of kick up Crude Mag and take it to another level, we knew we were going to have money to do it. You know, it had paid for itself, but it needs to bring in more money in order to do like documentary type series, in order to do podcasting, and we could have done advertising. And we realized that that is not the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, there can be some elements of partnerships. We've talked about that. But as far as the traditional advertising model, we won't do. Because what it does is it affects the content.
Well, we would eventually have to produce content that no one wants to fucking see.
Yeah,
you know, because it's the stuff that gets the most eyes. You know, it's the stuff that's the most friendly to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that just kind of cuts away at what the kind of journalism we want to do.
Exactly.
You know, and so I guess another thing I'd just like to say to everybody is, like, I hope you guys can learn to trust us.
Yeah.
You know, because I know that there's not a lot of trust in news, in journalism right now.
You know, one thing that I've noticed about Crude that I think is really encouraging is obviously the people who are fans of Crude within Alaska are excited to see this kind of authentic representation of Alaskan lifestyles. But another group of people that I think is really interesting are the people that have moved out of Alaska, and they hit me up or they hit Crude up and they say, thank you. You know, I live in Iowa now. I live in Wisconsin. I'm not in Alaska anymore. And so when I see a post that Crude does, or I see a story that Crude does, it's kind of like this lifeline back to Alaska.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's even how I found Crude. You know, I was living out of state. And it was really cool just, see something representing, you know, who we are from an authentic kind of core perspective. You know, we should also talk about our Patreon, because we're going to talk about this every episode, you know, and as much as we can, because the Patreon format and platform is what's going to allow us to keep doing this and to hopefully grow it and create meaningful content for the Anchorage and the greater Alaskan media market, and hopefully to anyone outside of the state, you know, who wants to look in and kind of see what's going on in Alaska. We don't want to form your opinion for you. We want you to kind of take some of the information we can provide through these firsthand perspectives, whether it's through our podcasting or through our video documentaries, and hopefully form your own opinion, or at least just talk about it.
And that's the purpose of these long-form conversations. We're not looking for sound bites. We're not looking to, you know, produce any gotcha journalism. We want to have a full-blown conversation with people that we know have an interesting perspective on stuff and that are doing cool things. We're not, you know, scraping through this stuff or picking through this stuff and, you know, piecemealing it for you. You know, hey, we already looked through this. This is what you want.
You know what's cool about the Patreon platform is it's going to allow us to really interact with everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Get feedback, show them some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, discuss what it takes to grow a media company. Join in this conversation, because what we're seeking to do with some of this stuff is to just understand ourselves better. You know, and we do that by talking to each other.
Exactly.
And so we want to cover everything. And hopefully by the time this is finished, we've figured a little more something about what makes Alaskans tick.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is the ultimate goal, is to help define Alaska's cultures in a way that gives it back to the general public and being like, oh yeah, that is a little bit of what I am, and gives their, I don't know, just their lifestyle or their life a little bit more meaning.
We're going to keep learning and keep getting better until we're basically known as the best podcasters, not only in Alaska, but in the planet.
On the entire planet. And since we're NASA's like trying to go to Mars, I think that we can accomplish that now.
I'm going to stop you there.
You're going to really? You don't think we can be better than people on Mars?
There's nobody on Mars.
Well, that's what they're telling us.
Welcome to Cody and Dustin's Crude Conspiracies.
All right, let's cut to the chase here.
David Holthouse.
David Holthouse.
I didn't know exactly what to expect when he walked in. So he's like an alt-weekly journalist. Now he works on documentaries. He's written on, the neo-Nazi movement and other kind of seedier parts of culture. And you kind of wonder, okay, what's a guy look like? And when he walked in, I was like, Holthouse looks exactly like I would expect him to look. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I've always wanted him to put on corpse paint, just because I think it would look badass. Do you know what corpse paint is, Dustin? I see this.
No,
look
I
in your
do.
face.
I'm just like, you're exactly right, man. Corpse paint would work.
Yeah, he just looks very like Norwegian.
Yeah.
That's all you gotta see. You look so confused. Like
I know. I just can't stop picturing him with the corpse paint. Like, what if when he did that, each guest,
like King Diamond.
I don't know King Diamond.
Oh, good Lord.
I know.
He's a...
Am I fired?
Yeah, you're fucking done, dude. I've done a lot of interviews in my life as a journalist. And what I have come to appreciate are the interviews that come easy, or the conversations that come easy, and they just kind of flow. You're just sitting there talking back and forth. There's a comfortable indication of when we can interject and we can ask a question, or we can give a little bit of an anecdote about our own life, and we all just feed off each other. And I think that really happened during this conversation.
Yeah, I would agree with you completely.
What's so interesting about someone like David is he's been there, right? Like he's telling us about this stuff, and we're actively, conversating with him about, something that he was actively a part of, which is really interesting, right? Because it's like this piece of living history.
He's just covered some really, really interesting topics. We got to talk to him about some documentaries he had made about, northern indigenous hip-hop artists and crooked Brooklyn cops in the 1980s. A Cuban spy who later became a cocaine dealer and is now living in South Africa, and he actually met up with them, right? And then the real interesting one, and I'm pretty sure this was the one you were most enthralled with, was the was the John and Lorena Bobbitt story, which is coming out in January on, is it Amazon, right?
Amazon, yeah.
Docuseries.
I knew you were going to go there.
Dude, you were just so intrigued by the knife.
All right, well, let's just jump into this interview with David Holthouse. Here it is.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, is that good?
Yeah.
All right. Mic is hot.
Mike's hot?
Mic's hot.
Is it recording?
It's record. That's what that means, dude.
Crude conversations. Listen more, then you talk.
Go to work. Technical difficulties. Thanks for being such a good sport, David.
Round two.
Yeah, round two. All right. So you just got back from Finland.
Yes, just got back from a 2-week trip to northern Norway and northern Finland. I'm named way up north, well above the Arctic Circle. Working on a documentary film project. It's an Anchorage museum project that I'm collaborating on with a fellow curator there, Aaron Leggett, and my wife, Priscilla Hensley. And it's about Indigenous hip-hop artists all across the circumpolar north. So we started with Alaska, and then the concept expanded to Russia and Greenland and Norway, Finland, northern Canada. The original genesis of the documentary, which is called We Up, was I was at the AFN convention in Fairbanks, I think 7 years ago, and in the lobby of my hotel were a bunch of teenagers from the YK Delta that were having a rap battle. and they were freestyling, but they were freestyling in English and in Yupik and switching back and forth between the languages. And I was like, that's super interesting. That's an interpretation of hip hop that I haven't seen. And from there, it was just like researching like native hip hop basically in Alaska and finding a pretty impressive pool of talent. And then the concept from there expanded to Indigenous hip hop artists in northern Canada, like really remote places in northern Canada. Nuuk, Greenland has an amazing hip hop scene. And then also finding that the Sami rappers and Sami DJs and break dancers up in northern Norway and northern Finland also have their own sort of incredible scene.
And the Sami rapper, he came here to Anchorage, to the Anchorage Museum, right?
Yeah, there's been a couple associated with this project that have come and visited. One, Ailu Vaile, was just here in April, and then Slin Craze. And Ailu Vaile is a Sami from Finland, and Slin Craze is Sami from Norway. But once you get up kind of in the far northern reaches of both those countries, up in the sort of Sami homeland, the international borders become very almost bordering on irrelevant, if you'll pardon the pun there. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you just cross back and forth.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, your phone tells you that you've changed countries. That's about it.
And I remember talking to you about the Sami rapper, and you were like kind of explaining to me like it sounds like this language was created to rhyme. Yeah,
I mean, if you listen to any of their work, Ailu Vaile or Slin Craze, there's another rapper called Amok that's great, who's also Sami. I mean, the Sami language has all these ways to have these really sort of fast, almost trilling rhymes, and it's also, there are internal rhymes, which you find internal rhymes obviously in hip hop and English, but in Sami it's just the words just connect perfectly for hip hop. It's the best way I could explain it. I mean, you listen to it, and it's like if there was a language that was better suited for hip hop, I've never heard it.
And so you're making a documentary?
Yeah. So this is a documentary film that the Anchorage Museum is producing, and it'll be finished, probably in early October. Like, we're deep into post production on it. We're in the home stretch.
Cool. And so did you travel to all these places?
We went to Greenland and a few different spots in Alaska, and then we went to Norway and Finland last summer and this summer to attend an annual festival there called Ridu Ridu. Yeah, cool. where they had a lot of hip hop. And actually, we went there. We didn't intend to go back this year, but based a bit, drawing some inspiration from our filming trip there last year, the festival directors decided to have the whole theme this year be Arctic Indigenous hip hop. So they brought some Sami rappers from Russia and some artists from northern Canada that we otherwise would not have been able to film with. So it kind of worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how long has hip hop been like a thing in these different areas? Because it's relatively new, since like the late 80s hip hop came around.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we ask these artists like what artists inspired them, and the first, all of them either say Eminem or Tupac, or vice versa, Tupac and Eminem. So that's where they started to draw it from. But the scene in Greenland actually goes back to a group called Nuuk Posse that came out, I want to say, early to mid 90s. So it goes back a ways there. The Sami rappers, they started to kind of come online in the early 2000s. Yeah.
And you guys are saying Sami?
Sami. Yeah,
Sami?
They're
What's
like
that?
They're like the indigenous people of Scandinavia.
Oh,
I mean, yeah,
okay.
And how many people speak that language?
I don't want to say because I might get it wrong. I know that Amok, he raps in a dialect of Sami that's only spoken by about 400 people.
I mean, the reason I asked that is because when I went and saw Slin Craze, one of the questions that was presented to the panel to him, or his answer was that it's very niche, the language that he's speaking. So he has to kind of consult the elders. Is this right? Am I saying this correctly? That type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting. I mean, all these rappers, they rap and they all speak English. Everybody there speaks English, but a lot of these rappers are tri or even quadlingual, meaning like if they're Sami from Norway, they'll speak Sami, Norwegian, and English, and sometimes also Finnish. And so they can mix all those languages into their raps. But they're all very conscious about using hip hop to revitalize their native tongue. which is also, which we're also finding with some of the rappers in Alaska. And, it's a theme sort of throughout these regions.
Do you listen to hip hop music at all?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what do you think is the difference between, say, a rapper like Tupac, like the traditional rapper, and the stuff that they're rapping about, which is kind of like what they see on the street, versus a rapper like the ones in Norway and Russia that you've been talking to?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. And there's some rappers that are more sort of activist first that we've talked with, and the rapping is sort of secondary. Like they might be either political activists, or they might be championing their language, and they see the hip hop as a tool of that. There's also like rappers that we talk with that are just like rappers first. What I mean by that is they're rapping about their daily lives, and that there's actually striking similarities between guys that are rapping about their daily lives in a tiny reindeer herding village in northern Norway and somebody that's rapping about it, from like Brooklyn or something. I mean, once you get past the setting, the themes of trouble at home, substance abuse, clashes that they might be having with somebody at school. These are universal themes,
So, in your opinion, when it comes to just hip-hop in general, what is its role as like an influence to society?
Storytelling. That's why I love it. And that's why I think it lends itself, why it's so easily adapted to really far-flung places across the globe. It's at its essence, it's storytelling. Like everybody can rhyme and everybody can tell a story. So, I mean, everybody has an interest in it, at least. And, interestingly, like Indigenous cultures, like they all have a powerful oral history tradition. Like that's one commonality between all these, whether it's like, Inuit or Sami, they both have, storytelling traditions that date back way beyond recorded history. So it's very easy for them to graft that onto the willing host of hip hop.
Should we talk about some of your other stuff? I mean, what other documentaries are you interested in? Or not interested in, but what have you been excited to work on?
Well, the first documentary, the first feature-length documentary that I worked on came out about 4 years ago. It's called The 7-5, and it's about a crew of corrupt cops in Brooklyn in the 1980s. And these guys were like all from Long Island, and they joined the police force about the same time, and they were stationed to the 75th precinct in East New York, Brooklyn. And for those not familiar with East New York, Brooklyn, like East New York, Brooklyn is still kind of hard, okay? And given all the gentrification that's gone on in Brooklyn in the last 15 years, like that lets you know what East New York, Brooklyn was like in the 1980s, which is that it was the deadliest police precinct in the country by far, worse than the South Bronx. And especially once crack really took hold, I mean, this is an overused descriptor for hardcore, inner city or urban neighborhoods, a war zone. It was a fucking war zone. Okay, there was like competing crack gangs like banging it out all day long. There was a cop that was killed like literally steps outside the police station. I mean, it was tough. And these guys, were sort of parachuted into this scenario as rookie cops, and they very quickly got corrupted. And over the course of about 4 years, went from being cops to being dirty cops that would like steal money from corpses at murder scenes, to eventually going to work for the drug gangs and like providing police escorts for cross-borough drug shipments within New York. They made a lot of money, and of course they eventually got busted. But it's kind of a period piece about dirty cops in Brooklyn in the mid '80s.
One thing that I always think about when I see those is getting wrapped up in a culture. So if you are a rookie, you're green, you're coming into it. How difficult? I don't know if you can answer this, because I don't know if you know, but how difficult is it to not get wrapped up in that culture and not be influenced by it so much that you are stealing stuff from corpses?
Well, I think it's, one of the guys in the movie, Kenny Urell, who wound up being the guy that flipped on the rest of his crew. But in any case, he traces it back to that time where he just I think he took a 50, He took a 50 from a scene. He can think like that's where he crossed the line.
50 caliber.
No, I'm sorry, $50 bill.
Oh, $50 bill. Okay.
Yeah. And that's where he crossed the line. And once he crossed that line, there was no going back. But of course, like within the New York Police Department at that time, and I'm sure to a certain extent today, like you just didn't like rat out fellow cops. You just didn't do that. So there were dirty cops, and in the 7-5 and a lot of other precincts at that time, there were a lot of dirty cops. And there were cops that were not, there were cops on the take, meaning that they were getting paid off by drug gangs. There were cops that would just sort of loot crime scenes. And then there were cops that like stayed away from that and were clean, but they would never like drop a dime on their fellow officers. Another project I'm working on right now is on the drug war and kind of the rise of the cartels in Mexico in the 1980s. And the central character of it is a DEA agent who was basically in charge of the DEA in the 80s. But before that, he worked in LA and he worked undercover. And he said that he knew, if he ever even took, he's like, we'd hit these stash houses and there'd be like $70,000 under a mattress. Who's going to miss 5? Who's going to miss one bundle? And it's all rolled up in drug money style. So it's all rolled up in tight little rolls. It's easy, just poop, take one. But he's like, I knew if I took one, to pay that utility bill or buy that new stove or whatever, there's just be no going back.
Once you break the seal, you break the seal.
Exactly. Which jibed with what Kenny Urell, in Brooklyn said, like I took that $50 bill and then it was like 1,000 and then it was 5,000 and then it was 10,000 and then like a year and a half later, I'm moving kilos of coke on Long Island and like bodyguarding drug lords.
So who were your sources for this documentary in Brooklyn, and did you talk with the former corrupt police officers?
Yeah, they were the sources.
Sources.
The director of the film, who's a longtime collaborator and close friend of mine, Chiller Russell, like I call him the gangster whisperer because
awesome.
He has a knack for talking with criminals. I don't know what that says about him, and I don't know what it says about me that I like to ride with this guy so much. But we both just get along with criminals, and I don't know how to put it other than that. Like, I guess maybe they just don't sense the judgment, or they just like sense that we're like receptive to their stories. And it comes down to it, like there's a theme to the movies, or the motif to the movies we've been working on, which is that we kind of find gangsters who are in the autumn of their years and want to tell the stories of back in the day. And the stories that gangsters have of back in the day, whether it was East New York or Moscow or, Cartagena or wherever, right? Guadalajara, are fascinating. Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, we talked with the cops. And it was like, these are guys that if they'd been approached by filmmakers or journalists, 20 years ago, never would have talked.
What do you think that is when they're in those kind of twilight years and they're like, oh, I can finally talk about it? Is it just it's time to talk about? Has it run its course so they're not going to get in trouble, or?
Okay, so good question. I mean, let me jump to another film that I worked on that came out this year, actually. It's called Operation Odessa. And Operation Odessa was about this plot that there was a plot to sell a submarine to the Cali cartel in Colombia. But I can run down the story in more detail in a minute.
Okay.
But one of the principal characters in it is this guy Nelson Yester, who is still like on the FBI's most wanted list. He's a fugitive from justice. He was a Cuban spy who was sent by the Cuban government to Miami on the Mariel boat lift. Like if you've ever seen Scarface, that's how Scarface starts.
Yeah.
He was on that. He was sent to be a spy in America, posing as somebody who'd been released from an insane asylum. Well, he got to South Florida, whatever that was, like 83, and took a look at what was going on. It was like, well, fuck this. I'm going to be a spy and a coke dealer. And then he, became a big-time coke dealer, wound up being like one of the main conduits for Pablo Escobar. And, eventually like had to flee the United States, lives in South Africa. What is his motivation for talking to us? His motivation for talking to us was, and we have this great sort of sequence in the film where there's all these federal agents. We're asking them on camera, do you think we'll ever be able to get this guy to talk to us? And they're like, not only will he never talk to you, you will never be able to find this guy. And then we cut to like, miking him up on his plane in South Africa.
Nice.
But why did he want to? We were interviewing some of his former like running buddies in Moscow. And Tiller, my friend, the director, got a text message from him, from Tony, the guy in South Africa, saying, I hear that you're in Moscow interviewing the waiters. Why don't you come to Africa and interview the chef? So to answer your original question, this guy, he's in his late 50s, probably. You know, he's got more money than he can ever spend, I would imagine. But he's basically living by himself. He can never go back to his kids are still in the United States. He can never probably see them again. And he's probably just facing some kind of reckoning and wants to tell his story, you know, wants to document his life in some way, or at least his version of it, because the versions of his life have been told by the federal law enforcement in the United States for decades, you know, and there's been like media coverage of him here and there. He wanted to tell his version of his story.
Go ahead.
Oh, so when you're dealing with criminals, you know, and especially when you're looking to them to be sources and they're currently, you know, in the criminal world, how do you get them to trust you? You know, as a journalist who's going to tell that story, how do you get, you know, down on their level and build that level of trust?
Well, it helps at this point to have a body of work that you can point to. Be like, see these movies, this is what we do. That helps a lot. But I guess the first thing I would say is that you got to take the time to get to know them before you try and put them on camera. You can't just show up with a crew, even if, you know, and just you need to kind of roll with somebody and be a part of their scene for at least a couple of days, ideally, you know, before you sit down and do the interview, and let them sort of like sniff you out and get a feel for you.
So so in that situation, do you go there and with no intention to film? You're just like, this is hangout day number 3.
Yeah, that's ideal. You know, I mean, sometimes, I mean, when we went to South Africa to interview this guy, not knowing whether or not he was going to actually agree to do an interview, I mean, we were showing up with, you know, with a director of photography and with a crew, I think like 5, and then had to hire another, you know, 4 or 5 guys in Johannesburg. But, you know, we certainly didn't like show up with cameras at the first meeting with this guy. I mean, that's not going to work. You know, it was like a couple dinners and a lunch and like hanging out and drinking coffee and brandy, and, you know, you sort of circle around to like, well, will you go on camera? You know, but you listen to their stories, and then you get a non-committal response, and then you kind of keep circling back to it until one morning he's like, okay, let's do this. You know, meet me at this airplane hangar. You let them take the lead is how I would say it.
Did you say meet me at this airplane hangar?
Yeah, that's what he's, yeah.
Dude, that's so criminal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's a pilot. I mean, he was trained by the Cuban government to be a pilot, and he keeps it's a fighter jet, but it's de-weaponized. It doesn't have any guns or missiles or anything, but it's a fighter jet that he keeps at all times fueled up and ready to go with a couple of like really nice suits and $1 million in cash in the second seat in the cockpit, just in case.
What does $1 million in cash look like?
You know, that's a good question, because one time one of the sort of the cards that turns in Operation Odessa, I don't want this to be too much of a spoiler, is at one point he comes into possession of $10 million in cash. And the director, Tiller, asked him that on camera. He's like, what does $10 million look like? And he said, it's a lot of paper, man. He's like, when you get $10 million, you realize that's a lot of paper. So $1 million still looks like kind of a lot of paper. But the $10 million he had was not like bank bills nicely wrapped in a large briefcase. So that's what it looks like. $1 million will fit in a briefcase if it's hundreds. Yep.
Yep, it will for sure.
What, how do you know, Dustin? Have you seen $1 million?
I've never seen $1 million, but I have seen $66,000 in a brief.
I think the most I've ever seen. Actually, you know what? No, I've seen $100,000.
Really?
Yeah.
Where'd you see that at?
My dad. It was during Christmas time after Borderline.
Dang, I want Christmas time at your house.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 100,000. He may correct me after he hears this. He's like, "Where'd you see it? Give me the 100,000." You are currently working on a Lorena Bobbitt documentary.
Yes. Yeah. It's a documentary series, actually.
Okay.
It's going to be a 4-part series on Amazon. I'd say it'll probably come out early next year. And it's on the Lorena and John Bobbitt case, which was about 25 years ago.
Oh,
a little over 25
I
years
remember
ago.
it from my childhood.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
And can you give us a quick synopsis of that?
Sure. So John Wayne Bobbitt, which is his actual name, was a ex-Marine who was living with his young wife, Lorena, who was an immigrant from Ecuador, in Northern Virginia, Manassas, Virginia. And they had a tumultuous relationship. She alleges that he was physically and sexually and emotionally abusive for years. I believe her. Prior to the incident. And the incident was that one night after he came home from a night of drinking with a friend, according to her, he sexually assaulted her. But what is a indisputed fact is that she cut off his penis with a kitchen knife in the middle of the night.
Jeez.
Yes, and left the house with it.
Do we know what that kitchen knife looks like? What type of kitchen
knife?
knife?
I've seen the knife. I've seen the actual
The real knife.
It is,
okay.
Yes, it is framed behind glass in the Manassas Police Department evidence room in Manassas, Virginia. Despite their claims over the decades to have destroyed it, it is framed behind glass. Yes, I've seen it. Yeah.
Like a trophy?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly like a trophy. You know what they've also got is the DC sniper case. You guys remember that? The Beltway sniper?
Yeah.
Yep.
They also have the whatever those two killers like rigged up to be able to fire rifles out of the back of their car, the like sniper's nest. They have that as well. They're like thinking about creating a museum starting with the Bobbitt knife and the sniper's nest, and then going from there and creating like a cop museum, which would probably be a pretty good tourist attraction.
Yeah.
But anyway, she basically cut off his dick and ran out of the apartment with it and threw it. And we were like once we were on the ground, we were like driving from the apartment to where the penis was found, which was this kind of vacant lot across the street from a 7-Eleven. We were like, well, she's driving, like she had to kind of do a left-handed hook shot up over the car to like get it in that field. So it was like,
did you recreate it?
Well, we didn't. We did
dildo. I feel bad that we're talking about this dude's dick like that, man.
This guy has been roasted since it happened.
Oh my God! It's
terrible. I thought, did they try and put it back on when they found it?
They did put it back on. It was actually the first ever successful penis reattachment surgery in medical history. We interviewed both surgeons that did it. It was kind of an amazing.
Did you see any pictures of it?
Oh yes. I saw the picture of the stump. I saw the pictures of the surgery.
Is he able to get an erection?
Yeah, he is, and he did porn to prove it.
Really?
Yeah.
Cody, are you going to the internet right now? Well, that's going to be interesting. That's pretty cool. It's on Amazon.
Yeah, it'll be on Amazon. And it was. I mean, it sort of came. The case. This all happened at the height of the so-called gender wars of the early '90s. It was around the time of the Anita Hill testimony, Clarence Thomas, and it was our society was having a moment similar to what it is now with the We Too movement. It was like a similar sort of sudden, like heightened awareness of issues of gender-based violence and sexual harassment at work and things like that.
So was the idea that Lorena Bobbitt was kind of sticking up for herself and taking power back, kind of?
Well, Yes, there were a lot of feminists who immediately sort of raised her as an icon of female empowerment. I don't think she had any of that going through her mind, and she was a very sort of reluctant symbol for a movement. She didn't really want any part of that. But yeah, there were a lot of people that imparted that kind of meaning to her action because of when it occurred. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I heard you actually got to hang out, spent a day with John.
Yes, I did. I spent 2 days with John Wayne Bobbitt in Las Vegas last year, late. Yeah.
What was that like?
Deeply weird. Like, he is still completely obsessed with this case. Like, it still just completely dominates his life.
The court case? Or just everything?
Because, well, you see, he got a good kind of like hit of 4 or 5 years of fame after this happened. He was on the Howard Stern show repeatedly. He did pornos. He was like paid to make appearances at, strip clubs. He flew around the country. Like, he went to a bunch of like Ron Jeremy, like porno night parties, poolside parties in Vegas, like whatever. He was solid like C-list celebrity.
Yeah.
B-list for a bit, and then C-list. Before that, he'd been a like broke ass ex-Marine loading boxes for a living who could never keep a job, like off again bartender kind of thing. So, in a way, at least the way that he sees it, getting his dick chopped off was the best thing that ever happened to him, or at least it led to like this fame and fortune that he never would have had. Now, he got taken advantage of by a bunch of people. Like, the first porno he made was one of the top 5 grossing pornos, like most profitable pornos ever made. This is back in the VHS days,
Okay.
They sold a shit ton of these because everybody wanted to answer your question. Can this guy get it up? There were people buying pornos that's probably the only porno they ever bought in their life. But he didn't see a lot of that money, and he's like, he's not doing great financially now. Now he's got like, if you go to Vegas to go like those wedding chapels, like there's several of them that offer
the shotgun wedding ones.
Yeah, they offer like the John Wayne Bobbitt package. So if you want to get married by John Wayne Bobbitt, they'll like call and get him out of bed in the middle of the night, and he'll come and marry you.
Is it really called that? The
Yes,
John Wayne Bobbitt package?
Because of course, what else are you going to call it? Right?
What and Lorena, how many years did she end up serving?
She actually she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And she was committed to a state mental hospital for, I should know this since I'm working on a documentary, but I'm going to say it was less than 3 months, more than 1 month, less than 3 months.
So if you're like nowadays, if you're ever like in a kitchen and you see her and there's like a knife in the room, man, you got to hesitate for a second, right?
One of many very odd things about Mr. Bobbitt is that he now has that knife set, the exact knife set. He has that in his kitchen now. Like
and that's on purpose.
Yes. He's like, I wanted to have the same knife set that was in our. I was like, fucking why?
Yeah.
But he does. Yeah.
Are there any answers to these questions? I mean, as psychologically, like why would he do that?
I don't know. Other than I think he sees. This is my take. Is that those are the glory days for him. And so anything he can have around that reminds him of the glory days, because it's not like, he's got, he'll sit around and watch like coverage of the case, like Donald Trump watches his rallies. It's like sort of the same sort of, and by the way, he's a huge Trump fan and supporter, needless to say, I think. But is that his ego is very much connected to that fleeting, weird, uniquely American fame that he had, and he was, back in the day, he was like a very good looking guy, like kind of in a Ken doll way, kind of could have been a poster boy for the Marines. And she was very attractive as well. So it's like, it's weird. It's like in this country, it's like if either of them would not have been as physically attractive as they were, I think the story would not have been as big a story,
Yeah.
So, and so what's Lorena up to these days?
She's married. She has a daughter. She seems like, pretty happy, actually.
And how does this case fit into the beginning of the 24-hour news cycle?
Yeah, well, it was sort of a warm up for OJ. Is what it was. It was like the one of the first times that criminal proceedings were packaged as television entertainment. Obviously, like, trials were, heavily covered in salacious ways by the media, going back to the Lindbergh baby kidnapping or wherever you want to go with that. But in terms of like 24-hour coverage, meaning like CNN is breaking away from stories about, Clinton having a summit on nuclear disarmament with Russia. They like broke away from the trial coverage for that. And there wasn't even like important shit going on in the trial. And they're like flooded with angry viewers. That kind of thing. So, a small town in Virginia just besieged by satellite trucks. And this was a new phenomenon at the time. And we interviewed some of the reporters for the Washington Post, print reporters. Like, this is basically pre-internet. The Washington Post had a very rudimentary website, but they weren't even trying to like update it every day. It was more like information about the newspaper.
Yeah.
So they were just getting their asses kicked by TV news, and they were under this incredible pressure from their editors to like be more competitive. But that when the TV news is breaking a story every 30 minutes and you're coming out once, maybe twice a day, you're cooked from the jump.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to get their perspective on that. It was like there was no way to break a story online, so the TV journalists were just killing them. But it was just a combination of factors. It was after the Gulf War. I think the Gulf War had sort of like whetted the public's palate for constant news, because that was a 24-hour story. And that really sort of like birthed CNN as a major media force. And tabloid shows, Current Affair, Hard Copy, where Bill O'Reilly was like a tabloid guy back then, and they were skyrocketing in the ratings, and their sensibilities were bleeding over into mainstream network news coverage and the way they covered stories right when the Bobbitt story happened. So it's just this confluence of all these factors.
And do you think we're still, we have to be still feeling the hangover from all that? I mean, it's maybe not necessarily a hangover, but we are experiencing the repercussions of all of that that how it influenced media now.
It's basically just snowballed from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was the blurring of the lines between news and entertainment is what I think was like an unfortunate result of those cases.
It's unfortunate for us as people who need to consume the news and the media, but for those who produce it, it seems like it's been quite a good thing for them, because the more entertaining they make it, the more divisive they make it, it seems the more money they make.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned CNN. I mean, CNN is obviously like they're doing some tough reporting on Donald Trump right now, but and people have a very short memory. But I remember the way that CNN would cover Donald Trump's rallies when Donald Trump was just a candidate, which is like in full, without commentary, without context. Donald Trump's going to get on stage and say a bunch of crazy racist shit. Let's cut to that right now and just show it, for an hour.
Yeah. So
they bear a lot of responsibility for the fact that he's in the White House. And now they're like, kicking his ass on a regular basis with their tough coverage. But it's like, to me, it's like, is it all just driven by ratings? Like they're like back then just showing people Donald Trump rallies like jack their ratings. So that's what they're going to do. Now, like, punching Donald Trump in the nose on a daily basis gets him viewers. So that's what they're going to do.
That's what I'm saying. There's a motivation that's not just like, let's present the information. There's like other motivations behind news now, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, everything is siloed. I mean, I go to the gym and I flip back and forth between Fox and MSNBC and CNN. It's like three different realities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They all have their, and what you're going to get from each of them. And CNN is moving like increasingly left. But it's, I've been a journalist since the early 90s, and so I witnessed the business change a lot. It's funny that I said business and not
well, there is a business end to it. I mean, that's
absolutely, there has to be. I mean, otherwise, you don't get to write and you don't get to publish, right? But it's They used to be, the lanes used to be really clear. There was the mainstream news and there was the alternative media. Now it just seems like it's a fucking free-for-all.
Yeah.
Where getting the story right is like secondary to getting it out there first. And really it's just all about, you know, clicks and viewers and eyeballs.
So do you think like this is affecting our ability to be independent thinkers? You know, versus like if the news came on once a night or you read it once in the morning, you'd sit back and you'd be able to think about these things. Whereas now it seems like you don't even have to think about them because you can just turn on the TV and someone's thinking about them for you.
No, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. And it's just like, everything is so fast paced. It just feels like you're on a treadmill running if you're trying to like stay on top of stories, and and you feel like you've got to check your phone every 5 minutes or you're going to miss like the next like, and I know that like the system's kind of gamed like that, and still I find myself doing it.
It's hard not to.
Yeah.
So you started off as a print journalist, right?
Yep.
And now you're making documentaries.
Right.
Do you think that's a normal trajectory given today's journalistic climate?
Well, it worked well for me. I mean, I found like a lot of the skill set required is the same, at least what I do when in making documentaries, which is, research, reporting, developing sources, gaining sources trust, developing source networks, the social engineering of like figuring out if there's a certain group of people where you're trying to like get in with them, figuring out which person is sort of the fulcrum point. You need to get them on your side, and then the rest will fall into place. So for me, it was a pretty natural transition. I think I've been very fortunate. I mean, there's a lot of print journalists I know from back in the day who have gone into other fields just out of sheer necessity, where they're not able to use their talents in the same way.
Do you think that it was your perseverance?
I think I was mainly just lucky, frankly. I mean, you make your own luck. I'm a firm believer in that you do make your own luck. And part of that, and what I mean by that is sometimes it's just being able to sense an opportunity or to be in the right place because you put yourself there. But I also have been very, very fortunate.
So when did you first get to Alaska? And was it journalism that brought you here?
No, I first came to Alaska in 1978. My parents moved up here. Kind of, I guess that's a little bit of the tail end of the oil boom years, but it was still oil money that brought them here. They were both in education, and then the Anchorage School District made them, very great job offers. So we came up here in '78, and I lived up here through high school, and then lived down the lower 48 basically for the next quarter century, and then moved back about 7 years ago. Then my first job out of college was I worked for the Anchorage Daily News in 1993 and 1994. Yeah, back when it was a great newspaper. Yeah.
Back when it was a great newspaper, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this was like, the Daily News had just won the newspaper war with the Anchorage Times, like the Anchorage Times. It had been purchased by McClatchy, but it was a big staff. I mean, it had a business department. It had a features department, it had a metro department. It was running a weekly entertainment magazine, and the weekly We Alaskans magazine. I mean, it was just like, print was still kind of king. I mean, it's not, and look, I think the Daily News now is better than it was a couple of years ago, but I don't think that by and large any newspaper in a mid-sized city is as good as it was in the 90s or the 80s, just because the money's not there. I mean, I also, after the Daily News, I went to work for the Phoenix New Times, which is the flagship of a chain of alternative news weeklies, where it was just like, I didn't know how good I had it. My story quota was one story a month. The papers were fat. 200 pages. People were paid well for their work. And it seemed like there was no end in sight, when in fact the end was just around the corner, and it was called the internet. But I was print was still king in the early 90s when I started out.
And the New Times, actually, they just stopped printing papers, right? Pretty recently?
No, they're still printing papers.
They are still printing papers.
Yeah.
What was it? What was that big news that came out about them like a year or two ago?
There was the Backpage scandal. The guys that started the New Times are under federal indictment right now.
Okay.
For various, I don't know what the actual charges are, but they started Backpage.com.
Yeah.
And they've been accused of knowingly facilitating illegal prostitution with this website. And I think a few years ago, they recognized the legal jeopardy, so they spun off Backpage.com from the journalism operation. That's made it a separate company, which was smart. But I remember when I worked at the Phoenix New Times and I worked at the Denver Westward, another alt weekly, there was a certain day by which you had to get in your classified ads, and we would go check out the classified ad section, because there'd be so many escorts coming in on that day to place their ads. It was just like a circus, and there'd be women coming in with their pimps and stuff, and there'd be conflicts in the lobby. It was always street theater of the highest order. So point being that prostitution ads or escort ads or whatever have always been a mainstay of the ad revenue of alternative media. So I don't know why the federal government is now going after them for Backpage.com. I don't completely understand it.
Back in the day, the press, I've heard stories about the Anchorage Press, there being lines of prostitutes.
That's true. I witnessed that as well.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it was always something about the complicated lives that escorts lead. They wait till the last minute to come in and place their classified ad for the next week, but they know when the deadline is, right? So in Phoenix, in Denver, at the Anchorage Press, whenever that deadline was, there'd be people coming in with their checks and their copy for that next week. And it was obvious. I mean, it's obvious what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things have changed.
I guess so. Yeah.
Well, now you see with the alternative, it's a lot of the weed and the marijuana shops and
yeah, and a lot of advertorial. I have noticed, and they call it sponsored content, really pushing.
Yeah.
So I think that definitely takes the edge off it, and it turns it more into a shopper.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't even pick up the press anymore.
Yeah.
Which is sad, but
I mean, what really bums me out about it was the article that I wrote after I was laid off from the Anchorage Press, and talking to all you guys, all the old heads at the Anchorage Press, Susie Buchanan, Nick Coltman, who started it, and just hearing, such great things. I forget exactly who said it. It might have even been you, that people were so stoked to work at the Anchorage Press that they probably would have done it for free. Uh-huh. And I don't know if that exists anymore, that drive. And if it does, I know for a fact that the people running the Anchorage Press right now aren't the ones to affect that drive.
Yeah. No, I don't think the Anchorage Press is that place anymore, for sure.
Speaking of kind of that article you wrote, the Anchorage Press is dead, and one thing, and I think it was your quote, David, and you had said something like revenue drives content, or should content drive revenue?
Well, when I was in my 20s, I would have fought somebody to the death practically over saying that that the content will drive the revenue, right? Meaning that all emphasis should be placed on the best stories, and that will cause people to pick up the paper, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think that there actually should be a just for the health of the few surviving papers that are out there, there can be a sort of natural tension, or not like a tense symbiosis between the two. But you can't do sponsored content and not expect to lose readers, not expect to hemorrhage readers, especially for an alternative publication, whether it's in Phoenix or Anchorage or wherever.
Is it important for local reporters to be the ones reporting on local issues, or is it possible for a transplant to effectively report?
I think it's really difficult for somebody to effectively report on Alaska without having lived here for at least a couple of years, if not being from here, frankly. This is a really complicated state, really complicated city to cover. But the weak local news, like around the country, I see as just being a huge problem right now. And I think we're seeing that in Anchorage right now. I know that there's stories that are just not getting reported. And I think a lot of it's just driven by economics, like we've been talking about. But I guess to answer your question, I think in Alaska in particular is difficult for new arrivals to effectively operate as journalists in.
And so you were working at the Anchorage Daily News and the Press in the 90s.
Yeah.
Correct? Mm-hmm. So tell me, in your opinion, what was the identity of Anchorage as a city then versus Anchorage as a city now in 2018?
Oh, great question. It seemed, I've thought about this a bit lately, and it seemed to me like I'm going to wrap in Anchorage in from the late 70s all the way through at least the mid 90s. Yeah. Meaning Anchorage felt much more like a distinct place than it does now. And I think that the internet is a driving force towards a kind of monoculture anywhere you go. Meaning Anchorage just feels a lot more like Fort Worth and vice versa, I think, than it did back before information and culture was based so much online. And I'm not necessarily knocking the internet, but Anchorage felt more separated from the rest of the world. Like being here, you felt more isolated than I do living here now. It felt more like a place unto itself that was far away from the mainstream of America than it does now.
Well, I remember growing up in the 90s, and even with music or any kind of culture, it seemed like it always got here later. That was just the thing, I'd go down to my grandma's house in Wisconsin, every summer, and it was like I'd have a CD and they'd be like, dude, we've been listening to that forever.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think now those cultures and, you know, what's trending as far as like popular culture is concerned are permeating Anchorage a lot quicker.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
What I'm interpreting from what you were saying, David, is that this place is a little less special. I mean, at least it's perceived that way. Me and Dustin grew up in the snowboard and skateboard culture in Alaska, and that scene was decimated, you know, after kind of an infrastructure, a shop. My dad's shop, Borderline, was out, and there have been a couple people that are recently trying to reinvigorate that, and you can see it happening. You know, people need a core. They need somewhere to go. It can't all just live online.
Right.
Yeah, does Anchorage have a core? I mean, is Anchorage in essence lost right now?
Whoa. let me voice the thought I had, and then I'll see if I can come back around to that. At the same time that maybe Anchorage, the Anchorage, as you put it, feels less special. I think that it's the flip side of that is that in a way it's never been as cool to be from Alaska, outside Alaska, than it is now. Mm-hmm. Like Alaska is cool, like the North is cool, the Arctic is cool in a way that, you know, that I remember going on the lower 48 when I was a kid, and you tell people you were from Alaska, and they would kind of look at you like you were from another planet or something. It wasn't necessarily something that was cool. And now I think it is, you know, even though I would say that Alaska and Anchorage is less cool than it was, you know, 25 years ago. It's more cool to be from here to outsiders. So I don't know what the deal is that. Anchorage lacking a core. It feels like it lacks a core identity to me in a way, but like with all these perceptions, I'm like, how much of that is my just like getting older and more calcified in a way? I'm in my late 40s now, you know, but it feels that way to me.
What gives a city its core then?
I would say shared experience, and it's because people are spending so much of their lives on their phones and online everywhere, not just in Anchorage, the experience that they're sharing is with everybody online, which is not like necessarily the physical place where they live, you know. So, you know, Fortnite has more of a core identity right now than Anchorage. It's like a distinct culture.
Yeah.
Right? And Anchorage is a lot more diverse, too, than it was in the 90s or especially the 80s or the 70s. I think that's probably a good thing, or at least it would be if people would get to know one another more. You know, there's this kind of like this old school kind of frontier, you know, rough and tumble edge to the city that's not there anymore. You know, I remember downtown Anchorage when it was like downtown Anchorage still. You could still see the remnants of when it was really wild. You know, the Montana Club and the Monkey Wharf, all those joints. But anyway.
So it used to be crazier?
And a different kind of crazy.
Different kind of crazy.
Different kind of crazy.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a city. I mean, it seems like it's gone through phases, but this city feels like really sketchy to me right now, too. I mean, just watching people on the street, like it's just like the kind of reporting I've done is like I clock things, like especially when I'm on foot. You know, just I try staying like really aware. There's just a lot of people on dope in this city right now. Just a lot, like way more than I ever remember there being. Like not drunk, like you know, on meth or on heroin or on. I mean, the spice thing seems to have subsided a bit, but people just fucked up. Like Midtown's kind of it's a wild place early in the morning, especially. Yeah. I get up early and I walk around Midtown. It's like, wow, this is
noticeably different.
Yes. I don't remember anything like this as a kid being present in this city. I mean, there's always been like homeless population in Anchorage, but now there's like this different set of homeless in Anchorage that are like tweaker homeless, you know?
Yeah.
Not like drunk homeless, like methed out homeless, like
that are stealing cars.
Stealing shit, yeah. Like junkie street thief homeless that are out there, you know, banging around, tweaking around stuff. They're not standing on the corner holding a sign. They're out there like sketching around, like stealing shit. I mean, it's just and they feel like more of a hazard, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave off on that thought.
You know, I think it's interesting to hear from someone who's older than us, Dustin, about that, because we've talked about similar things. Dustin's from Fairbanks. I'm from here in Anchorage, and I have absolutely noticed, at least in my mind, that this place seems more dangerous. But I don't know whether that's a perception of mine because of where I live. I live, downtown, kind of like where stuff happens, So is that different than living, on the south side where I grew up for a little while, or on Muldoon where I grew up, since I was a kid? So I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, I'm right now currently living in a pretty nice neighborhood. It's families, 2-story homes, and people have cameras on their houses. It's something they're doing now. So I think that the entire community of Anchorage, it's like just becoming accepted that there is crime, and they're used to it. I mean, I got out of my car the other day and looked in, there's a club, the thing on the steering wheel on somebody else's car, right? And it's like...
That's old school.
Yeah, that's old school, but I think that we're like just getting used to it or comfortable with the fact that there is more crime here.
Yeah.
Yeah, subjectively to me, this place feels much more dangerous than I remember it being in late 70s, 80s, all the way through the 90s. Like, it feels like a more dangerous city to me in a very significant way. And part of that's just seeing what's going on in the streets, and part of that's just, it just seems like there's a lot of petty crime that you just hear about, like, in your social circles, people getting shit ripped off like all the time. And that's all drugs. I think it's all drugs. It's all junkies that's driving that. The theft of bikes, cars, propane tanks, shoes, anything you leave not bolted down outside your house. It didn't used to be like that.
Do you think that maybe you're possibly more aware of this because you have kids now?
I certainly well, no, actually I don't. I think that I've always been like kind of streetwise, at least as an adult, and just kind of my nature driven by the nature of the work that I do to kind of see what's going on around me when I'm out and about. Subtle things, hand to hand, like people that you can tell by the way they're moving their eyes, they're looking for an opportunity. I just see a lot more of it than I remember here.
You've done a lot of real alt weekly articles, meaning that you have been around a lot of sketchy people. Now that you have kids, has your perspective or the way that you pursue a story, has that changed at all?
Oh yeah, I don't pursue the same kind of stories anymore. No. I'm not about to stay up for 72 hours with crystal meth addicts to write about it. Yeah. So I just don't pursue the same kinds of stories that I used to.
So back when you were reporting on the, that other side, what were some of your favorite stories that you wrote?
Well, the one where I stayed up for 3 days with tweakers was I think a high point. But I lived on the street with we called them gutter punks or crusties in Tempe, Arizona. In the winter, like all these kids, they called themselves travelers. Would just show up on Mill Avenue, like near Arizona State University, and I was just fascinated by this. Like it would just like show up like some sort of reverse winter migration, and so I just went and kind of wasn't pretending to be one of them, but again, talking with them, spending time with them, spending days with them before you take out a notebook or a recorder. Get a few people on your side, or at least like recognize you when you're down there, and then eventually just like went and lived with them for the better part of a week. Followed different crews of them around and wrote about it. That's one of my favorite stories I ever wrote. Certainly, the combined process of I really was into the reporting, and then also was really happy with the writing process. And sometimes those don't match up. Yeah.
And where, if we wanted to read that, how?
Oh yes,
how
it was
we read
in the
it?
Phoenix New Times. Mill Rats. That was another nickname for him because it was Mill Avenue instead of Mall Rats. It was around the Mall Rats era.
Yeah.
But people called them Mill Rats, so that was the headline. So if you Google Mill Rats in Phoenix New Times, it'll bring it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you think the pervasiveness of lies affect a society?
Well,
whether it's in journalism, whether it's from politicians. It just seems like in this moment in history, there's a lot of lying going on and a lot of people who are either completely against it or don't care.
Well, let's kind of take a look at that a little deeper, right? So you have this like 4chan, right? And that's where people are spreading conspiracy things like the QAnon thing, right? Mm-hmm. You have even like politicians who sometimes
QAnon.
lie. Oh, QAnon, yeah. Politicians who lie, right? So you kind of got whether, misinformation, whether you have like biased reporting, whether you, like you said, you can look at CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, and you're living in 3 different realities, right? So we are living in a world of lies and alternate realities.
I think it's like what's going on right now. I find it personally, like my subjective experience is that it's just like profoundly disorienting. Meaning, like, at what point did the truth like become irrelevant? It seems like finding out what the actual facts are is just irrelevant to the discussion. And if that's the case, how can you have a discussion? If facts don't matter, how can you have a policy discussion? How can you have a debate over issues if like facts don't matter? If facts don't even play into it? I don't know how this all plays out. But my personal experience is just fine. I just feel like disoriented. Like, what has happened? Because when I was an investigative print journalist, like the rules were pretty clear. If you like busted a politician, they stayed busted. Like if you nailed them on some facts, like that was the game, That doesn't seem to be accountability to the truth. And I don't know where that's going to take us.
It's scary.
It feels really scary right now. Yeah. So I try and factor that into what we were talking about earlier, like my perception of what's going on in Anchorage. I mean, I think I'm pretty grounded in reality most of the time. But there's just, I do have at what point is my unease over the larger goings on in our country on a socio-political level, like bleeding over to my perception of like what the tweaker's doing at, Midtown corner. But it's just the rules changed, and they changed fast, and they changed without discussion, it seems like.
I was a substitute teacher for a while at an elementary school, and then now I work with youth at a teen media center. And one thing that I've realized is, say if I'm asked a question by either the elementary school student or the youth at the teen center, and they're like, maybe why is that wrong? And I have so many things going through my head. Maybe they ask a question about why is it wrong for this politician to lie? And I have maybe 100 anecdotes in my head that I'm ready to spit out. But essentially, why is it wrong? And maybe when I'm thinking, the question I'm thinking about answering is, if one of your kids were to ask, see something like that person just lied on TV, why is that wrong, Dad? How would you respond to that?
I've had to respond to that recently, and it's good question. It was a good question. It was a good question when my 7-year-old son asked me it. And it's that, at least in the case of our elected leaders, in the same way that I think America has never quite lived up to what it purports to be, but in its best years, it's at least trying. Our elected officials are at least supposed to try to carry the banner of being better, and that means not lying as a normal course of action, and having it be acceptable.
Well, I think there's a lot of things playing into this right now. We talked about kind of the 24-hour news cycle, right? And as citizens in a democracy, the truth and information is one of the guiding things that we can use to enable our freedoms, enable our course of action, enable discourse. And it's our goal as a citizen to kind of react to the information. But then there's other people who are out there whose job it is to control the way we react. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, that's the politician. They want to get ahead of a story. They want to control the way you react to it so that they stay in power. And now the problem is, it seems like the journalists are working hand in hand with the politicians to control how the citizens react to the story. they're taking away our ability to react independently to the news and information of the day.
Yeah, because everything has so much spin on it. Every ball has so much spin on it. Yeah, I get that. I think what I told him too is that, like, and this speaks to your point, is that in a democracy, which is like our system of government in a very idealized way, which is everybody's supposed to, like, vote and decide, that people have to be voting based on a common set of facts. And when the president or when another elected official is just knowingly distorting those facts on a daily basis, it makes democracy stop functioning properly. Because then it's not a debate over what to do about the facts of X, Y, and Z. Then it's like, it's just, everything is just in chaos.
Going off of that last question, I think maybe the follow-up to that, as a kid asking an adult the question, is, why is democracy important?
Well, that's a good question, man. And I'm sure you've seen like the surveys of your generation and the generation that's coming up behind you where people seem to be asking themselves that question and more. Whereas, like, I grew up in the Cold War era, and it was like democracy came with a cape,
Yeah.
So I think that, I mean, we're way away from Arctic hip hop at this point, which is fine. But I mean, I think I'm at least entertaining the notion of, like, maybe this shit doesn't work. Maybe it doesn't work. Well, at least not for us. Maybe not for the United States of America. Maybe this experiment's failing.
I don't know. I think the problem is we just take it for granted when you don't have, say, like in the Cold War era, when it was really easy to distinguish yourself from say communism, right? And you could say, well, there's that or this, right? We don't even know what an alternative is, so it's easy to take it for granted. I've traveled to Algeria in the Middle East, and so, for example, they don't have some of the freedoms and rights we have. I got pulled out of a car by a guy with a machine gun, and it was a legal search. But, you can't just stop somebody and pull them out and search their car in America. And then I went and visited a friend who was a journalist at one of their national newspapers. And it was in a complex behind like a giant concrete wall with barbed wire all around it, one way in and out, guarded. And that's where all the journalists of that country worked. Because it was a dangerous job. It was deadly, right? They had to be protected. And they had to work there, So there's certain things that can quickly go away for us that we take for granted, and I think that I don't know if the other system would end up working for us.
I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not advocating for anything but democracy, I mean, but having just been to Norway and Finland, where things function really well, I was there when Trump had his summit with Putin in Helsinki, and the journalists like came together to buy the billboards stretching from the airport to the place of their meeting about the value that they place on the free speech and free media.
This was in Finland?
Country. Yeah, in Finland.
And sorry, what did they do?
I think it was the largest daily newspaper in Helsinki. They purchased billboards going all the way from the airport to wherever that summit was held, that were just sort of extolling the value of free speech and of an independent media, And those are, I would argue that both Finland and Norway are high functioning, democracies. I mean, you go there, it's like there's no homelessness, at least not any visible homelessness. Everything feels like very safe. Everybody seems like really involved in being a participant in the democracy. I mean, people have differences of opinions. There are rival political parties along a similar spectrum to what we have here, but it's just it's a totally different vibe, and it's a different level of engagement in a general sense of how engaged people are in being a part of the process.
Yep. Well, you look at those countries, and it's kind of they're social democracies, so they're higher educated. I believe colleges, kind of give them for free there.
It's free.
Yep.
If you get in, it's free. Yep.
If you get in, exactly right. But then also, those societies are a lot more homogenous. They're less diversified culturally, racially than we are, and so I wonder if that allows them to come together easier.
I also wonder if they have reality television.
I believe they do.
Yeah, they have reality TV.
Okay.
And they have the slow TV too, where you'll just watch a train going through a winter landscape for hours, and that's it.
Really?
Yeah, or just watch a fire.
Yeah, in the same way that we watch a fire on Netflix.
Yeah, right.
Is that an actual show?
Yeah, there's two versions. There's an hour-long version, and I think there's a half an hour-long version.
Are you bullshitting me, dude?
I swear to God. Yeah, look it up. I mean, do you have Netflix?
Well, I had it until my ex-girlfriend changed her password, so no, not at the moment.
Yeah, you can pick a few different fires.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Do I want bonfire or fireplace? Yeah, I mean, how do you feel right now then, since we're talking about kind of journalism in the press about Donald Trump's, the press is the enemy of the people. As someone who's a journalist, how is that affecting you?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I would call myself a journalist anymore. I think at some point I crossed over into documentary filmmaker. I'm not exactly sure when that happened, but I still. How does that make me feel? I actually just think I take that as just one more sort of like asinine thing that's come out of his mouth recently. I mean, I don't think that he necessarily understands though the power that his words have. Meaning, I think that if he keeps talking shit like this about journalists, he's going to get somebody killed. I know that there was a sort of like a leap on some of the media to ascribe that recent newsroom mass shooting. And it didn't have anything to do with him, you know. Yeah. But the pump is primed, okay, for somebody like that guy that showed up with a gun at that pizza restaurant in D.C. or like that guy that showed up at the
Pizzagate.
I mean, Jesus, it's like it just only feels like a matter of time before somebody who's a real follower of Trump like decides to take that thought to its natural conclusion in their minds. I certainly wouldn't want to be a high-profile like news anchor on CNN or MSNBC right now. I mean, I hope that they've got some pretty significant protection. But how does it make me feel? I'm just wrestling with how it makes me feel that I felt like this country isn't the one that I thought that I was living in, and I've had that feeling since he was elected. So the fact that he's up there saying that the media is the enemy of the people, I mean, that's just like one in like 100 or 1,000 things that he said or that he represents that are also contributing to this sense of disorientation that I seem to be coming back to repeatedly tonight. Yeah.
So what do you think needs to happen to like regain homeostasis?
Yeah, to reverse course. Is it simply an election?
Well, I think that's the best case scenario. I will say I don't want to see Trump impeached because I don't want to see Mike Pence become president, and I kind of want Trump to leave the White House, sort of to be elected out of the White House, I guess, and to try and return things to a more orderly state. I mean, obviously, and I'm no huge fan of the Democratic Party either. But a check, on his power in the House, and would be a great thing, I think, to come out of the midterms. But I try and also I think there's an old Chinese saying that it's like basically translate to in every crisis there's opportunity. So on my brighter days, I try and see like things can just change so fast. It feels like, that it's possible that maybe this country comes out on the other side of the Trump era like a better place even than it was going in. I think it's possible, but I think it's also possible that, it's going to be President Pence and The Handmaid's Tale in 5 years.
Love that show.
Yeah.
So I know you credit your success with luck. Mm. I mean, you've said that in this conversation. Do you have any advice for an aspiring journalist in Alaska? Maybe one that's in college right now, maybe one that's in high school right now, that's looking at what is happening currently with journalism.
Yeah, learn as many platforms as you can. Learn to shoot. Learn how to frame a shot for video, and learn how to frame a shot with a camera, and be adept with still images, and be at least be like competent with video cameras. And if you're, then the flip side of that is if you're like more interested in being a documentary filmmaker, well, learn how to write too. Learn how to write stories, because that's kind of what I do with documentaries. I kind of write them. So it's you need to be more versatile than either I'm a print journalist or I'm a broadcast journalist or I'm a TV
that doesn't exist anymore.
I'm a radio journalist. Like you need, I think that where it's headed, and maybe start playing around with the augmented reality and like VR cameras and stuff, because I'm not sure exactly how that's going to take off, but it's going to become something that if I were in college or high school right now, I would sure as hell be training myself up on, that sort of leading edge stuff in terms of how stories can be presented, because nobody's really hit it yet with the virtual reality, but it's going to get there. It's going to get there as a form of journalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think about virtual reality and what that can do, and journalism in a story can be a very powerful thing. I mean, it can change policy overnight. You show a picture of some dead whales on the beach or a sea of plastic in the ocean, and it can change public thought. And I wonder how virtual reality and being able to immerse somebody in there into like a war zone or an environment, how that can change their thoughts and how that could be a pivotal moment in how journalism is a tool for society.
Yeah, I think it has huge potential.
Yeah.
Huge potential. I think this is my thinking on is that as a tool for journalism, virtual reality will only start to live up to its full potential once everybody's gotten over the novelty of virtual reality, because now it feels to me like people like put on a VR set and it could be like putting somebody into, the war zone in Syria, or it could be like putting them on top of Mount Everest or wherever. They're just like, oh my God, I'm in a different place. They're just sort of wowed by the experience of it. Well, once people get used to it, in the same way that once people got used to television or whatever, then you can start to do like serious nonfiction storytelling with it and start to have that impact. But right now it's just kind of in the wow, virtual reality phase still.
Yeah, I think I'm going to throw up. Take this thing off me.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, right now, who are some of your favorite journalists? Do you have any people you like to follow? You think that are on the cutting edge?
No, it's more outlets. I mean, I'm a big Vice media fan. Obviously, I mean Matt Taibbi that writes for Rolling Stone. I like his stuff a lot. Who else? It seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me like everything's just so dispersed that journalists don't have this. Journalists don't have the same kind of celebrity in a way that they used to. Like it just because there's so many, each with their own brand.
Now, when you think of the celebrity journalists, they are, like broadcast news journalists, and they're
Rachel Maddow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's kind of where I was trying to go with that. Is that it seems like there's. Like stories will hit, and it just seems like the bylines are not as important as they used to be. Go ahead.
Well, it's probably because there's less depth to a story. I mean, the fact that you have to get something out every 30 minutes or whatnot, you're not putting that time. The writer doesn't matter.
Right.
People aren't reading 3,000 word stories anymore.
It's going to be artificial intelligence. They talk about it. That's going to be able to like write stories.
Right.
You just put in like the buzzwords.
Yeah. There's not as much. There's not as many distinct voices doing nonfiction like feature writing. Like people don't read features as much. There's not as much. It's not like a story hits in a monthly magazine and then people are then talking about it for a month, like the way things used to work. Things just come and go so fast.
And it's not like people are reading less. I think that people are reading more.
Right. Well, they're consuming. Yeah, in terms of like consuming more words. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. But there's just like nobody like steeps on something and like dreams on a story or like lets it kind of like seep into their lives for a couple weeks. Like when they're like a really big story and like Esquire or Rolling Stone or New York Times Sunday Magazine used to come out, like everybody be like, God damn, did you read that story?
Yeah.
I don't think it's like that anymore. Like stories that have like a good, if you have a good run for like 6 to 8 hours, that's a good run with the story.
But people do that with documentaries. I mean, look at Making a Murder. I mean, everyone was talking about that.
Believe me, that's one reason why I jumped. It's like it's a golden age of documentaries right now.
Yeah, video as a medium.
It's huge. I mean, there's so many streaming services coming online with big budgets to actually like invest in films so they can be made the right way. It's like being in the alt weekly world back in the 90s, except this time I realize how good I've got it. You know, to be able to make a decent living, like doing something that I love, which is like storytelling, like telling stories that I want to tell the way I want to tell them. It doesn't get any better than that. It's just like I've got kind of a second turn on the merry-go-round, and this time, like, I really realize how lucky I am.
You know, earlier you said that you don't consider yourself a journalist anymore, and I have really preached the idea that documentaries are journalism. It's just long-form journalism, and in the same way that you used to only have to do one feature a month back at New Time. You know, this to me, now what you're doing seems pretty parallel to that, in that you are working on another piece of long-form journalism.
Right. Yeah, it's, I guess the catch though, or the difference is that when I was writing stories, and that's all I was doing, I mostly worked alone. So when I was a journalist, I associate being a journalist with working alone. Like occasionally maybe like being teamed up with a photographer, whatever, but mostly it's very solitary craft. Making a documentary film, you're part of an ensemble. You're part of like a company, a team of at least a half dozen like people. So that's maybe where I see the difference. Yeah, it might be. Yeah. And now I'm writing a play. We can talk about that maybe for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm writing a play about a journalist who's undercover in the neo-Nazi movement, and it's based on an actual experience I had in 2005 where I was undercover with this group called the National Socialist Movement, or NSM, and they were having a rally in Toledo, Ohio, and they'd all gathered at this cheap motel just outside of Toledo to kind of get on their Nazi shit to get ready for the rally, and Steve Bannon was there, and this was back when Steve Bannon was just kind of like this, and I'd seen him before. A few months before that, down at the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona, and I was also undercover. But then I was undercover with the like Minuteman, like anti-immigration border vigilantes. Okay, and they had what they called a muster, where they went down there and tried to catch Mexicans. And Bannon was around then too. And at the time, he was like this rich, sort of eccentric character that was hanging out on the far right, doing these pseudo documentaries, championing the cause of the Minutemen. Now he didn't have a camera at that hotel where the NSM was, but I had no idea who. I mean, I knew who he was, but then to watch him, became who he became, and actually have an office in the White House, it's like, are you fucking kidding me? In the same way that I was an intern at the Village Voice in 1992, I was an intern for a columnist named Mike Tomasky, who's still, actually, he's a journalist that I follow. He's a political journalist, but he's more of a commentator, but he's great. But he wrote a weekly column, and if he would get stuck for so you would have several items in the column, and if he would get stuck for his last item, if he'd be like, I need like another 2 or 3 inches of copy, 2 inches a paragraph, he'd be like, Holthouse, go call Trump. And it's because Donald Trump would drop whatever he was doing, in 1992, to talk to any journalist, even if it was an intern from the lefty Village Voice. And it would just be like, Mr. Trump, tell me about your favorite hot dog vendor, whatever. I literally asked him that one time. And he was just like fucking, we thought we were clowning him, Do
you remember his answer?
What's that?
Do you remember his answer?
No. It would, whatever you asked him, he would turn it back to how fucking awesome he is within like 5 words. So it didn't matter. Like it really didn't. Would call Trump and be like, you could really just say, Mr. Trump, go. And that's it. But you would have to ask him a question. But it was like we thought we were clowning him. But yet at the same time, now I'm thinking like, fuck, man. In a way, like I played a small part in helping keep him, elevated.
The media has totally enabled him.
Yes.
I mean, how many billions of dollars in free, TV time did he get because they just had to cover him? He knew that. He learned it back in the tabloids and with the Village Voice in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did.
So we're all complicit.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, man. Well, actually, there's probably a lot of people here that are grateful. They really... They're pretty stoked on Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think so.
For me, I'm not, I didn't go to school for journalism, not classically trained, but I studied political science and kind of, by default had to learn about it and saw its importance and just love telling stories and kind of, extracting that part of society out and retelling it. And so working with Cody and stuff has been really exciting to get involved in this. So it's been really cool to sit down with you today and kind of hear it from someone who's been involved in it for a long time. And so I appreciate that.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Yeah, it was great. It's always great talking to you, man.
Okay. Cool.
Right on.
Awesome.
You can support local grassroots journalism at patreon.com/crude magazine. If you're not familiar with Patreon, it's a platform that makes it easy for you to support content that matters to our community for as little as $1 a month.
Crude Conversations is written, hosted, and produced by Cody Liska and Dustin H. James for Crude Magazine. Intro music was produced by Alcoda Beats.